they were like, wait a minute. And they pulled out their phone and like, I think I've heard this before. And I had written the same riff and the same progression and almost the same melody as Taylor Swift. And I'm like, whoa, I didn't even know the song. Like, hey, folks, I'm here tonight with a man who's written, produced, and marketed an entire album during a pandemic, all while raising a new family and navigating the demands of a job change. Gabe Close, you are truly a Renaissance man, and we are all envious. Tell us how you're able to pull all that off.
Well, I will say it's not easy, but I think the love for music is certainly something that we all have, and one of those things that keeps driving me. Justin, I know you and I were talking a little while ago. Part of it is I started this record years ago. We finished up a record in 2015 called Leave That Light On. Started writing songs for the next record, started recording maybe 9 months to a year after. And I began the project, and, the pandemic and, had a son, and all those things came while recording the record, and you just feel like, okay, I got to finish this thing. I can't just put it on the back burner and say, well, I got 3/4 of the way done with it, man, I'm good. And so it also, one of the main keys is an understanding wife who says, okay, I'll take the baby while you go to the studio tonight. That's huge too. So.
Yeah, there's a big difference when a me turns into a we. Just their whole world changes. So absolutely. So yeah, so Wake Up is the new album, and it's actually your sophomore album. You mentioned Leave That Light On came out to rave reviews in 2015 with a full music video for a great song called Weary Mind. The link is in the description if you want to check it out. Let's take a look at a clip.
I've been running down a long road. I've been playing on my banjo. I've been trying to find another girl like you. Yeah, you.
So a lot has changed in the world since your first album. What was different this time around? What effect did the pandemic have on your production? I know you started it before the pandemic, but you were finishing it in the middle of it. What effect did all that have? Talk about the challenges of the pandemic, of family. Were there any plus sides to once the pandemic hit? And just talk about what was different this time around.
Sure. I think the big thing was we were coming to finishing touches. I'm talking like a harmony part here, one little guitar part there, and mixing the last few songs in March of 2020, and the pandemic hits. And so at that point, we were thinking, the members of the band, shout out to Mike Baker, who recorded this record and helped produce it and mixed it all at DSL Studios in Louisville. But we're all finishing up and thinking, okay, in the fall, I'm going to have all the CDs made, everything pressed. We're going to do like we have done so many times before when we've released songs or the last record, have a big party and a release party, sell CDs, maybe sell some vinyl there. I've done vinyl in the past. And all that went out the window, right? You go, okay, I've got these last few things, and I don't even know if it's a good idea to go in the studio and sing. Can I do that with a mask on? Can we separate enough, even though they're just a few little parts? And so I really paused probably until about June, when I figured out, okay, I've got a vocal part here. I can go do that in the studio by myself. I can, this guitar part, somebody else can come in and do that in a separate room. And so we put the finishing touches on, mixed it over the summer of 2020. And then it really became this question of, okay, do I hold on to this record? And I've worked on it for 4 to 4.5 years. Spent a lot of time, energy, money on it. do I hold on to it and wait till the pandemic's over, whenever that is, so we can release it like we normally do? Or do I go ahead and put it out? And I really just felt like so many of the themes of the record for this moment, and songs always make sense. They always have meaning. A lot of times people pick up on meaning that you didn't intend, and that's perfectly okay. But I felt like a lot of the meaning was for now. And if I waited a year or two to release it, it just wouldn't be the same. And so those were really the challenges. And you mentioned marketing earlier. You know, you go to almost all digital marketing, which I would love to say I'm super savvy at, but I'm not. And so you're putting things out there, you know, shout out to your viewers here. People are using CD Baby or TuneCore, you know, websites like that, really helping with that digital marketing and YouTube and all kinds of things that how do you get the music out there when you can't have, you know, a bunch of people come out to a show? And so those were the big challenges. I do think the pause, you asked, were there any positives? The pause because of the pandemic was a good way for me to really reflect on the record. And I thought, well, we're not rushed for time now. Let's make sure we finish it right, you know?
Yeah. Let's zoom in on those lyrics for a minute. You mentioned you wrote a lot of it before the pandemic, and yeah, it a lot of it sounds like it came right out of the pandemic. It's funny how, you know, once you create something and you set it free, you know, then the meaning, you know, listeners get to hear what they hear, whether you wrote it that way or not. It's brilliant though. But I love the lyrics. I mean, songs like the title track, Wake Up, or Don't Give Up, or I'll Still Be Here. There's just so much optimism. But at the same time, it's gritty, and, you know, it realizes this darker side of life, but it still holds on to that hope. You know, how do you find that balance in your lyrics? Because, you know, it was there even before all the pandemic. It was there, this balance of reality and just unabashed hope. You know, like, I'm just going to hold on to it no matter what. How do you find that balance in your lyrics?
Yeah, I think for me, some of it's inspiration of people I grew up listening to and like, and I know Justin, you would chime in with some of these same people, but, you know, artists like Springsteen or Dylan, who are great songwriters. And, you know, Springsteen can write an album like The Rising, which is really about an incredibly tough thing and moment in our country's history, and 9/11, and yet it has so much hope. And so I think for me, it's really being able to admit where we are in reality and say there are tough challenges every day. And for me as a person and a songwriter, I have to consciously fight against, like, well, I could get bogged down in that and be like, oh, this is bad and this is bad and this is terrible. But there is hope out there, and I want to include that in my songs. And also, when you're out playing gigs, that's not what people want to hear. Like, hey, man, everything's bad. Let me tell you about how bad it really is, you know? So I think it's the mix of inspiration. It's that mix of fighting to hold on to hope myself, and then knowing, all right, when I play this out, is this going to make people walk away and go, that made me feel a little better. I don't want people to walk away and go, I was feeling bad. Now I feel worse. You know, that's never a good idea.
That's great. Yeah. So you mentioned Springsteen as one of your influences. I think you can really hear some of the other influences in this album. Like, it's just, you know, you listen to it, it's like a walk through American music. You can just hear some of those voices ringing out, especially like Tom Petty on, you know, Dancing in the Rain. I mean, you can really hear it in the live version. Here, let's take a listen to that.
Silver
how did this happen? Did you sit down and say, I'm going to write a Tom Petty song? Or, how did that play out?
Yeah, it was not that. I always start with songwriting. I used to, when I was really young, write all the lyrics first and then try and fit music that went with the lyrics. And sometimes that becomes really difficult because you have, meter and all those things that play into lyrics, and you go, how did I get these to fit? And so really in the last 5 to 10 years, especially since I've been recording, I've kind of had an idea in my head, a general theme of where I'm going, a few lyrics, a turn of a phrase, and then you start playing around on the guitar or piano. Those are really my two. Acoustic guitar and piano is kind of where I start. And then you find, okay, that meshes with this theme. Let's go there. So I certainly didn't, set out to try and write a Tom Petty song, but I do think that the lyric, the dancing in the rain idea of sometimes you got to let go of things that are beating you down, or even when you're beating yourself down, and just do something silly like dance in the rain, that was already there. And I know I was writing that around the time that Tom Petty died. My wife and I had just seen him that summer on their 40th anniversary tour. So I think sometimes those things kind of creep in, those influences when you listen to a lot of music. You get a hint of this there, a hint of that. And I do remember a moment of when I'm writing it, I consciously wanted to write a little more of a rock and roll song. We've stayed really Americana, and I love playing electric guitar, but don't use that as a lead instrument a lot on my songs. I let somebody else do the electric. And I thought this is going to be an electric guitar song, and got into it and kind of went, yeah, it's sounding a little Tom Petty-ish. But I'm okay with that. There's nothing wrong with, Tom Petty is the master 3.5 fun, hopeful, kind of want to drive down the road with the top down songs. And, if that's the worst thing that somebody could say to me, this is like a Tom Petty song. All right. I'll take that all day long.
No, I think you can be proud of that comparison, and especially the fact that you weren't consciously trying to imitate it. That says something about who you emulate. That says something about you and the fact that you just did it naturally. I remember one time I wrote a song. I was teaching it to this youth band at the time, and they were like, "Wait a minute!" And they pulled out their phone and. I think I've heard this before, and I had written the same riff and the same progression and almost the same melody as Taylor Swift. And I'm like, what? I didn't even know the song. Like, I must have heard it on the radio, like once, and it got in my head. And
See, I think that proves you're a good songwriter, though. You need to be cashing in on your Taylor Swift too. And sometimes that happens. I've even gone to other band members and said, you just listen to so much music. I've got my records behind me, and sometimes it just comes out that way, sounding a little like this, a little like that. And the truth is, pretty much at this point, it's all been done before. So you don't ever want to copy or intend to copy anybody, and certainly. Like I said, I didn't take that song from Tom Petty, but it has a feel to it, and you go, okay, as long as I'm not stealing anything here, if it's an homage to Tom Petty, there's nothing wrong with that. I love me some Tom Petty. So
that's what Bob Ross would call a happy little accident, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Let's talk about you did this awesome live stream show because of the pandemic. That was part of your reimagining, how you're going to release things. And so you did this full show. What was that experience like? I mean, you were playing, I assume, for an empty room. Yeah. What was that like? And if you had to do it all over again, would you do anything different?
Sure. Yeah, I think to start with your last question first, if I had it to do all over again and kind of what it was like, I would relax a little more. I was so nervous, not because of playing. I play with the guys in the band before. We play gigs all the time. It was more of a are we really going to try and release this thing in the middle of a pandemic? Is everybody going to be safe here? This kind of fear of, we're spaced out and we wore masks before and after we played, but you also go, oh, I would hate for a band member to get something because they did the show and that didn't happen and we were safe and had the doors open in the venue and plenty of ventilation. So I think if I had it to do again, I would relax a little more. But it was weird and fun, it was kind of like, you and I've jammed before for countless times. It was kind of like getting together with the guys and jamming to play some new songs. And so that part was fun. We had a couple people there to help us set stuff up and somebody to run. The whole thing was filmed on a phone, somebody to run that. And that was it in the room. And so that part was kind of fun. I do miss, usually when we put out new songs or record, we try and imitate, I guess I should say, the record as much as we can. So not having the other vocalist or some of the other musicians, that part stinks, but we kind of promised ourselves, all right, whenever this thing's over, we'll get out there and do it right. So
yeah, so a lot of my audience, they're just hobbyists doing music for fun in their basement, but maybe they want to take it to the next level, something approaching what you've done here, but maybe they haven't had a chance to make the connections yet. So tell us how you went about, I'm sure it's a long process, but how did you go about finding enough quality professional musicians to fill the parts on this album? I mean, you've got banjos, you've got violins, you've got guest vocalists. Where do you find these folks? What's the process once you found them? Then what's the process for getting them to bring your vision to life?
Yeah, great questions, Justin. So it was a long process to start with, cut the last record and some other songs before that. But really started with our guitar player, Dennis Ledford. He was my guitar teacher as a kid. And I remember finally figuring out, all right, I'm going to go out and play some gigs, started it playing in church, grew up playing in church. I'm going to go out and play some like non-church gigs and my stuff, and ask him, would he come and play? And he plays in several, pretty successful bands around Louisville. And I figured he'd just be like, yeah, maybe, or I might once. And he was like, yeah, sure, I'm up for it. And that was like, oh, really? You're going to play, you're an incredibly good guitarist. You're going to come hang out with me on stage. That's awesome. But that connection, he knows a lot of people and that helped. Some of it is just playing gigs myself, and you start to meet other people. You do an open mic night here, you jump in a gig there. A good friend of mine, songwriter here in Louisville, Nick Pay, he and I have done some gigs together. And so on the last record, he came and did some harmonies with us just because we've traded songs and done some stuff before. And so I really think it's building those relationships. What musicians do you meet? Do you know? I think there's some sense of adventure of being able to say, okay, I think somebody else might be able to do this. I remember the first few songs I ever wrote and was really serious about. It was like I had to play, because I'm a guitar player, I got to play all the guitar on this. And being able to admit to myself as a songwriter, maybe somebody else has a better guitar part, or maybe somebody else has a better piano part or can play this better than I can. And so you start to look around and go, all right, who's better at this? Who's really good at this? And I think that's a big part of it too, as a songwriter, being I had a buddy of mine say a long time ago, the song will tell you what it needs. And I really try and live by that. And so if that song doesn't need Gabe Close to play guitar, it needs Dennis Ledford to play guitar, or Blakely Berger, who's on this record, playing fiddle, or Danny Horde to play some blues harmonica, TJ Birchfield on the drums. If it needs that, then you go and get that if you can find it, you know. And so building those relationships is really important. And also in the studio, being able to admit, you know, I worked with Mike Baker, who I mentioned at DSL Studios here, and he's a Rolodex of musicians. You know, he's just worked with so many people. And that's how I've come across several folks just say, hey, Mike, do you know anybody that plays fiddle? Oh, yeah, I've got this great person, and call them up. And so that is really how able to find musicians and build relationships. And, you know, give a shout out to Steve Cooley, who plays banjo on the record too, who's an incredible musician. I don't even belong in the same room with that guy. He's so good at banjo and mandolin and all this stuff. But you get people and you go, all right, I get to jam with them today because they're going to play on the record. But the second question, Justin, you asked about the vision, that's tough. I think some of it's music theory, you know, say this is in 6/8 time and this is how this is going to go, and you got to give somebody the vision of what that is. I think some of it, you know, listening to a lot of music helps. Can go in and say, especially having experienced musicians, this is going to sound a little bit more like a Van Morrison song. And when you got experienced musicians, they can go, oh, okay. You know, when you have somebody who's only listening to like Nirvana, no offense, I love Nirvana and listened to them nonstop growing up. But, you know, if that's all they know, then you go, this is kind of a Van Morrison song. And they go, huh? So being able to describe to those people what it sounds like, and then being able to make the tough call of knowing when it does and doesn't work. Yeah, I've worked with some great musicians that their cut isn't on the record, and it's not because they aren't great. They're better than I am. But you go, what does the song need? And that day, that thing didn't work. And being willing to say, that's not working. We need to find the thing that does. It's not about hurting anybody's feelings, but we're shooting for the best song.
That's awesome. Let's talk for a minute about your gear. You got one of your guitars next to you there. I want to admit tonight, I want to confess, I have a bit of a problem. I'm a recovering guitar addict. I'm about 3 days sober. I just traded for this new Strat a few days ago. But it's a trade, right? That doesn't really count, right? Because you're just switching them out.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think I counted the other day. I own like 17 guitars. When I counted it all up, I'm like, oh my gosh. Anyway, I'm constantly changing them out. You know, I log on to Facebook and it's like an endless stream of guitar advertisements, and it's just I can't escape this. But this whole time I've known you, I mean, you've had like 3 guitars and they're awesome. There's nothing wrong with them, but I'm like, really? You know, how are you able to do that? How are you able to hold on to that? You've got your crate amp, you've got your Les Paul, you got your Strat, your Takamine acoustic. Maybe you've changed some out since the last time I talked to you. But
I have a Telly, and then I got a Fender amp that I changed out. I had a Marshall, and I changed out for the Fender. I loved the Marshall, but it was so heavy. It had 2 12s in it. And I used to joke, you know, if somebody wants to steal this, go for it. I'll catch you, you know, because there's no way you're going to get far with this. And I love that amp. Marshall makes great stuff, but I just got tired of hauling it around. First, let me say, Justin, I think part of it, just a few guitars and a couple of amps, really is you got to be left-handed. because there's fewer options out there for you.
And they cost more too, right?
Yes, that's right. They cost a little bit more, 5 to 10% more, and then there's fewer out there. I do think that's part of it, but part of it as a songwriter and playing in a band when we play out is also being, for me, I'm the rhythm guitar player, and I love playing lead. But our guitar player does a great job playing lead. He's way better than I am, and so I really kind of settled into what are my good rhythm guitars? What do I need to take to the gig? What can I perfect that sound with and hold down the rhythm guitar? And that doesn't mean, I've always wanted a Fender Jaguar. It'd be great to have a Rickenbacker. And there's a great place in Atlanta that has a ton of lefty Rickenbackers I used to go and drool over. But, when you're writing a song, it's like, okay, what do I really need for this song? And unless it comes up for that song for me as the primary rhythm player, I played a little lead on the record, but our lead player's changing out the guitars and the gear more than I am. And so I think it's really about, for me, perfecting those instruments and making sure I'm doing a good job holding down the rhythm and locking in with the drummer and the bass player. And so it's not that I wouldn't want more guitars, but I think a lot of times the space to use them for me isn't always there in the gigs or on the record. It's more just buying to play around at home. So,
yeah, I'm coming off my. I was about 5 years sober on on buying guitars, and I've been binging here. I've been relapsing the past few months. But hey, your humility, your recognizing other people's talents and using that to your own advantage. I mean, it seems like you've escaped both the American ego and the American, machine called consumerism. I applaud you for that. To an extent. Yeah. No. Well, hey, let's talk about the music scene, the live music scene in Louisville. I mean, I'm probably the most envious of just the sheer number of venues in your city. I mean, I'm from the suburbs of Atlanta, and there's just very limited places that you can go and get a gig somewhere. But the pandemic has had an effect on everything. So what are your predictions for what's next for live music, just in general and specifically for Louisville? I mean, I'm not asking you to be a prophet, but we did meet as students working on our Master of Divinity degrees. So, go ahead and divine the future for us. Okay, the future of music. Just divine that out right now.
Yeah. Louisville does, it's a interesting town in that there are quite a bit of live music places. I think people enjoy live music. It's got this weird dichotomy of there's not, it's not New York or Chicago where you have more people and you have a lot of people looking for the next new thing, and some of those areas, indie artists make it a little better just because there's more people and you always have a segment of people that are done with the popular thing. I want the next new thing. And Louisville's not necessarily like that, but it is a town that loves live music. And so for that reason, there are a lot of restaurants and bars and places. I really kind of got my foot in the door and got started and built my confidence doing an open mic night. And I'd go every week and I'd try a song of mine and play a cover. And so that was great to build confidence and get out there and just do it. But the pandemic has really taken a toll. I mean, I know several local music venues that have had to shut their doors here. I do think at some level, while we'll miss those venues, there will be venues that crop back up. Just the nature of people wanting to hear live music. I think people have figured out that they took it for granted. You know, I have some friends that are tweeting or posting Instagram pictures. I miss concerts. I miss this. So I think it'll come back. It may take a little while, but I saw Jerry Seinfeld several weeks ago. Somebody was asking him about comedy and was it over? Was stand up over? And he said, no, and, you know, stand up will come back. And I think that's true of live music and live gigs. It'll come back, and people will use those as social events and remember how much they enjoy, you know, being together in restaurants and bars and concert venues and singing along. And but it'll probably take some time, and it's going to take some people with a little bit of money saying, I'm going to open this venue because this one, and this one closed down. And some people getting behind that and saying, we're going to continue to support live music.
You're navigating this whole, you know, pandemic thing and the job changes and everything. Are you as exhausted as I am being a dad and trying to keep music going?
Absolutely. You know, it is exhausting. I think the mental exhaustion of trying to figure out, all right, how do I do what I did, what I used to do? How do I do it now? You know, and or even, you know, the cycle of, well, I did it this way last week, but now there's these stipulations or this variable. And yeah, so it's exhausting coming up with new ways to do what we used to kind of take for granted, you know?
Yeah. You know, I remember back to our 20s when we met in school together, and I was a whiny baby back then, you know, but I realize now how golden it was, you know, how good we had it. I mean, we could just, hey, you want to jam on Thursday after class?
Right.
Like, yeah, that'd be great. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Hey, you want to go do this open mic night on Friday? Like, yeah.
I'm not doing anything Thursday or Friday. Sure. Yeah.
Like, it was only a question of whether you wanted to do it or not. It wasn't
right.
like,
that's right. Yeah.
You know, let me check 3 calendars and line up a babysitter and, you know, spend $100 before I go spend money somewhere else.
You can move anything that you had because it wasn't, you know, anything monumental.
So. Yeah, you know, you found something to be unhappy, or I did. I always found something to be unhappy about. Like, well, you know, it could be better. Now, wow, yeah, totally different thing. I think the worst thing I did when I had my first son was born, I couldn't figure out how to keep music going, and so like I gave it up. You know, and I was willing to lay that down to put family first.
Sure.
But I think part of it was I wasn't creative enough to just, you know, figure out something that would work, you know. And so I sold a bunch of gear, and and it really, I mean, it's about 5 years that there was just kind of a pause where I didn't grow or create anything. And one day I was like, you know, something's got to give, and I sold some more stuff, and I bought an amp that had a headphone jack.
Yeah.
And that made a huge difference because, you know, after everybody went to sleep, I could go and jam. And the first thing I did, I learned the solo to Hotel California. And I'm like, you know, maybe I can still do something. And it just kind of went from there.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that. You mentioned kind of when we were chatting back and forth, my crate amp, and the reason I've kept that thing so long is you know, I have a house now, and I've got kind of a basement music space, but for so long living in apartments and things, it had the headphone jack, and I could plug in and go, all right, I'm gonna jam a little today. For that very reason, that amp has stayed with me for a while. So
I think we're saying the secret to keeping music alive as a busy dad is headphones.
Yeah, get an amp with some headphones. Yeah, and
changes everything. Well, hey, thanks so much for being with me tonight and sharing your craft and your passion for music and just how you've managed to put it all together. it's inspiration for all of us that, there is a way to balance being a dad, having a real job, and still being able to keep music alive and to be creative and to express yourself in that way and to involve so many other people in your projects. I mean, it's just a testimony to the power of music to bring people together. And, we're having this conversation because you did that during a pandemic, and, we haven't spoken in, I don't know what, like 6 years or something. And I'm like, oh, he's got a new album. I'm like calling you and I'm like, hey, I want to tell you. So, it's a cool thing. So thank you so much for being with me tonight.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure. And hey, as you know, I'd love to talk music, mine or any music anytime.